Private practice owners have to do some selling. There, I said it out loud. It's either you and your office staff to ultimately try to schedule a first appointment for a new patient, or maybe you are trying to hire or rehire a field business development person that goes by a lot of different titles, but you know what I mean, to try to create referral sources. So this is a fact of life for just about every private practice owner out there. But doctors hate the idea of selling. And I've known this for a long time. And for a while, I've been looking for a guest to come on Practice Care who can talk about selling without jamming it down our throats. And I think I found the guy. My guest today is going to help reframe your mindset so that selling seems palatable. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. And the mission for both is the same. It's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they really want to do, but I firmly believe that care is better when it's just you and your provider at the desk figuring out what to do, and nobody else is secretly whispering in the provider's ear what their own agenda is, whether it's the hospital, the health system, other owners, whoever it may be. It's just you and your patient, and everything's better when it's just that. And my guest today is Jeremy Pope. Jeremy owns and runs Sales Call Overhaul, which helps business owners fix the things in their sales process, to use Jeremy's own words, that make selling suck. He says it's fun going beyond the boring industry standard close rate of 14.5%. Think about that. For every 10 that you talk to, less than 2 become patients. That's pretty bad. He says, I was never a super talented salesperson in his own right with crazy charisma, and he even hated marketing and sales for the first couple of years in his own entrepreneurial journey. And that's a big deal to say because marketing and sales are crucial to being a successful entrepreneur. And after honing his sales craft in a, quote, non-talented way, he was finally able to let his new giver process do the heavy lifting, and he became a top salesperson. He went on to become the sales manager of a team that made $1.7 million per month in revenue, no small feat. And then he started a consulting business, training teams for international businesses like direct marketing giant Guthy Renker. And from there, he became the client success director for traffic and funnels. And to this day, he still does sales coaching with some private coaching clients. Jeremy, thank you for coming on Practice Care.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Yeah. And like I said, I've been looking for somebody for a while to talk about sales for doctors, dentists, and such, because there's a lot of things that they did not go to medical school for. And this is probably top of the list of what they would say. They want to treat patients. The idea of sales is, throw in your adjective, distasteful, I will say diplomatically, but nevertheless, it's a fact of life. No matter what type of specialty or whatever type of doctor you are. Let me start with a basic question. Just tell us, you've had medical and dental client practices as clients in the past or currently, yes?
Yes.
Cool.
Both as a sales consultant and getting referrals from them as a clinical hypnotist back when I did that.
Right. Okay. So can you just tell us about one of your clients? They came to you for they needed help with sales. We'll just start there. So kind of fill in the rest for us.
Yeah. Dr. Rich he was doing elective procedures, and he needed some help figuring out how to work with marketing for the first time.
Okay.
Most of his business had come from referrals. He wasn't growing. And so he started working with a marketing firm.
Okay.
But the process required to work with this firm was so vastly different than getting referrals who were already pre-sold that he was kind of despairing that he was even going to have time to sell the way that he needed to.
Right.
And so with him, we were able to take the new sales process that was needed to work with cold traffic,
right,
and make sure they were as warm as possible, but then shorten his own consultation process pretty significantly and build his close rate at the same time with the $1 million ear strategies that I teach.
Okay.
Basically, learning to listen effectively is a very powerful tool when you can't afford to focus on sales most of the time.
Right.
That's probably the number one place to focus.
Okay. So there's a distinction in there. Everybody loves a great referral. We all do. You and I do as well. They've been warmed up. They've been,
Yeah.
so much of the boxes that you've got to check for somebody to become a new patient or client have already been checked by the time, you become aware of them. But um, marketing delivered leads or non-referral delivered leads, they're colder, right? And so not nearly as many of those boxes have been checked, and thus the need for a sales process, I guess, is
Right.
born, right? Because the boxes are the same, whether it's the
Yeah.
referral checking them for you or you having to check them yourself. There's a difference,
Yeah.
in who does the job. And I guess there's the sales process.
I've seen this done wrong so many times, and I've done it wrong myself a couple times as well.
Okay.
Um, One of the ways that you can do it wrong is try and build your referral practice without having a good sales process behind it. Trying
Okay.
to build the referral business only and hoping other people will do the work for you.
Yeah.
It's just not reliable. Uh, if a business is to be scalable, and this isn't just medical practices.
Hmm.
This is most of the service-based businesses that I found. If it's to be scalable and if it's to be scaled relatively quickly,
Hmm.
then you can't have more than about a third of your business coming from referrals. And so when you have when you have a great deal of when you have a great deal of leads coming in that are a little bit either colder or just not quite as far along in the process even,
Yeah.
you really need that process to be internal so that you can be flexible, you can be resilient, your practice can be complete. If you need to retire at any point, which everybody does,
Hmm.
then you need to be able to hand that practice off to a buyer or to I mean, a big part of your thing is helping people stay private.
Hmm.
So if you want a new private buyer to be able to come in, to step in and pay a good price for it,
Right.
instead of having to sell to private equity or sell to a large strategic group
Yeah.
who already have the processes, that means you must have the processes in place already.
Right. Right. And whether the mix is 30%, referral based or more, there's actually a fair number of types of practices, whether it's their tenure or what they do, where referrals can be a lot.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was just thinking about
no,
that.
that's
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Because,
true. That's true.
yeah, but
Yep.
what I was going to say is the central point is, if private practice owner X, your desire is to grow more, then you've got to have both arms of getting new patients ready
Yeah.
to go, both referral and those who kind of call you,
Yep.
off the street or whatever it is,
I'll
whether
modify
however warm or
that
cold they
statement.
are. Yeah.
I'll modify that statement significantly here. For a business to consumer application
Hmm.
where you can be advertising and marketing and getting people directly off the street without a
Hmm.
referral, then the best growth numbers come from that two-thirds, one-third kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, there are plenty of businesses where they can't go and get a customer directly. They must work with referrals.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Sure. And we all want to develop them, right? So but
Right.
but no matter what, you're best off to really to control your own growth, to do all you can to have growth. Because even if you don't want to, triple in size or whatever it is, patients leave, you have to replace them. It's
Yes.
natural. And so you just can't rely on either one independently. It's best to have both ready.
Yep.
So excellent. So then for people, practice owners who need to sell or need to have the sales capability embedded in their practice, but just hate the thought of it. Um, when you meet them, where do you start with them with just trying to open their minds, to
It depends
get
on the
them to
size
keep
of the
going?
practice, really. Um,
Okay.
if they've got a significant number of staff, then we typically start with the staff and creating
Okay.
very simple sales processes and handoffs from one person to the next,
Hmm.
so that there's um, a good patient experience. Patient experience goes deep into sales,
Hmm.
and having a patient experience that is easy and cheerful and gets listened to rather than dull and all paperwork focus and
Hmm.
talked down to or lectured.
Yeah.
That can be one of the first places to start. It changes depending on the practice. I just have to examine and see what's going on with
Sure.
this particular one. But that is a common spot when there's a significant number of staff. When there's, say, when there's 4 doctors in the
Hmm.
practice, things like that. When there's one doctor and maybe a couple of other people in the
Hmm.
office, something like that,
Like a front desk person.
right?
Yeah.
Then a lot more of that load is on the doctor, and
Hmm.
so we we do everything we can to minimize the selling load on the doctor.
Hmm.
So, what are your front desk people allowed to talk about
Hmm.
without practicing medicine without a license? How
Right.
far can we go in the sales process without violating that?
Hmm.
And then uh, giving you the information that you need
Hmm.
to listen appropriately. So much of sales is in listening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we think it's in pitching. I mean, sales and pitching is almost synonymous in some
Yeah.
people's minds, right?
Yeah.
But the, I mean, that's why I call some of my stuff the $1 million ear, is because, I mean, if you want to add $1 million to your practice by a combination of raising your prices, adding a profitable procedure, um, hiring new people, just new
Hmm.
client acquisition, patient retention.
Right.
Um, I have more non-doctor clients than I do doctor
Understood.
clients. It's
Yeah.
and so I often say clients instead of patients, but it's all the same
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
this purpose.
And there are
And
some parts of the world of healthcare where they call them clients as well.
okay,
So
okay.
yeah. Yeah.
So with the listening, there are a few things that you can listen to that make a tremendous difference. Um, what is this person's pain, and what is their vision?
Hmm. You don't mean physical pain, right? You mean,
Well,
I
I,
guess it could be both. Yeah.
I actually did not mean it that time, but it can be both. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There are so many salespeople that use medical metaphors unnecessarily
Right.
and really in unhealthy ways.
Right.
But
But do you mean like what is the pain with the experience they're having with their
yeah,
current
exactly.
doctor or
What's the
without
emotional
having?
pain, or the what's the problem that they're experiencing right
There you
now?
go. Yeah.
If we can get an emotional diagnosis
Hmm.
in addition to the physical, all the assessment or diagnosis that they need,
Yeah.
then that makes a tremendous difference. It's a huge amount of leverage in that conversation. And if you can tell what emotional procedure to perform to
Hmm.
motivate, that's everything you need right there.
Yeah. Like I switched my primary care a few months ago because I just felt the experience, the depth of care, the quality of care just wasn't there anymore. So my pain was things are getting missed. It just feels like things are getting missed. So I need to find somebody who's more thorough.
Okay, let's use that as an example.
Yeah.
You come in and you talk to your new PCP
Hmm.
as about the topics of things are getting missed. I need you to be more thorough. And they start talking about, oh, well, we've got all these procedures available. And we're like,
Hmm.
you're PCP. Why,
Yeah.
why are we talking about procedures? They start talking about the biscuits that they provide to everyone who walks in the door. It's like, okay, maybe that's a good user experience. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a good patient experience,
But
but
I'm
it's
not hungry right now.
irrelevant
And
to,
that's, yeah.
right. I'm talking about missing things. I'm talking about being thorough.
Yeah.
Um, so hearing what someone is actually talking about
Hmm.
is one of the biggest things that you can do
Yeah.
as a provider. Just
Yeah.
actually hearing them, and it's one of the biggest things that literally what we're talking about here is bedside manner.
Hmm.
Because when you look at hospitals' Press Ganey scores or departments' Press Ganey scores,
Hmm.
when you look at the malpractice rates for doctors, it's not the doctors who are more skilled at a procedure who get sued less. That's
True.
not a thing. Uh, the big thing that makes the difference is the doctors who get sued less are the ones who admit their mistakes in some
Hmm.
kind of counterintuitive ways
Hmm.
and show empathy and listen.
Hmm.
So when the patients feel heard, even when there's a problem,
Hmm.
it's a really solid foundation for a relationship.
Yeah.
So whether you're trying to motivate someone not to sue you, or whether you're trying to motivate someone to buy particular
Come into
procedure,
your practice. Yeah.
come into your practice in general.
Yeah.
Um, it's all this motivation is motivation.
Yeah.
And so hearing them properly is a
Hmm.
very powerful tool that you and your staff can all use and hand off to each other. I mean, this is practically EHR level stuff. If the EMR had space for it,
Yeah.
I would put it in there. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's that relevant to, like, how do we talk to this person in front of us?
Yeah.
It takes so little effort when you make the mindset shift,
Yeah.
and it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
Um, but so many doctors, they fear they're going to spend all their time on sales. They're not going to be able to be a doctor anymore, and that's just not the case.
Yeah.
It
And
is,
I wanted to ask you a bit about that. We were talking about it before we started recording
yeah.
about, what are the objections? I guess another way to ask the question I just asked is, what are the objections that you hear about, oh, I don't need this, or I can't do it. It's not for me. So, sales aptitude, I mean, bringing components of it into the practice.
If you need to persuade people, then you need persuasion ability, period. Um,
Mm.
if you have a responsibility to persuade people effectively, then you must develop that skill. There's
And
no way
persuade
around
means
that.
choose our practice. You have choices. Why
Yeah,
not choose ours?
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so you build persuasive skills and you will build sales skills without
Hmm.
having to focus on the sales part of it. But the other part is, let the process do the heavy lifting. If there is a persuasive process that you can use, then it means you have to learn less, or you don't have to learn as much, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
So you learn to follow the process. I mean, surgeons have a checklist,
Hmm.
pilots have a checklist. Any professional who is trying to be responsible and not miss things for their routine stuff, um, they're almost all using checklists. Dr. Atul Gawande with the Checklist Manifesto drilled that into my skull. A
Yeah.
great book if you haven't read it.
The
Um,
checklist manifesto. Okay.
oh, it's enlightening. It's
Yeah.
enlightening.
Okay.
And he talks a lot about medical practice, and I think the pilot example comes from that book as well.
Yeah.
But he's advocating that we take checklists from the medical world and put them into other worlds as well with people who don't have as much experience with checklists.
Yeah.
How much more then
Yeah.
should we be doing that in the medical world here?
Yeah.
But just as your procedures have a process to them,
Hmm.
sales has a process as well. There are certain steps someone has to mentally and emotionally make to be able to make an effective decision. They have to move from the world of calculation into the world of imagination. And so when you can help them access both of those worlds effectively,
Hmm.
and it doesn't take long. I'm talking seconds, not minutes for the most part. So
Hmm.
I'm not talking about adding 4 hours to your workday or adding 30 minutes to every new client consultation. I'm talking about changing the existing process to make it very effective.
Right.
Um, it when you learn to prompt for the questions that you need answered to be able to motivate this person,
Hmm.
that's the change right there. You
Right.
can guide the conversation to an emotional diagnosis and
Hmm.
uncover that. You can uncover that diagnosis with them instead of, okay, got it, got it, got it, got it, and then present at the end.
Right.
You build that with them, and they have the ability to follow along with you.
Hmm.
They're making the decision with you as you go through the conversation.
Yeah.
And so there are no surprises. There's no letdown for you at the end because you missed the signals. You've
Yeah.
been collecting those signals all along. And it's just so much easier when we collaborate on those decisions rather than hold back. And
Yeah.
like, this is a part of the process you don't have to be an expert on. You can be
Right.
here on this part and be an expert on what you're an expert on. And it's
Right.
just so relaxed and so easy, and it feels so natural.
Yeah. And there's some things you said in there that I really like. When I hear process, I mean mechanical in a good way, and almost like a recipe. Because what I mean by that is there's a
Yes,
set number of steps that anybody can learn.
right.
Because you talked about, uh, emotional and imagination, and they're
Mhm.
they're they're accurate, but they're also large. And so I like the idea of a recipe. I love them because, when I'm learning something new and I've got this checklist, a recipe, I say, I'm just going to follow this checklist until I really get good at it. And then maybe, I'll add a little more salt or whatever. I'll start to make it my own. But why would let's just follow this. There's nothing better. Why don't I just follow this, figure it out, see what feels natural? And the other thing about, working with the prospective patient, I, it's the same for you and I. Every once in a while, I'll meet somebody, and it's clearly let's get to know each other. Could we work together? And the first question I'll get is, so what do you do? And I'll say, I do lots of things. I mean, rather than kind of vomit all over you what I do, tell me, what's on your mind? Like, is there a problem you're having, or just, and then you get them talking right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I know where I add value. I know what we're good at, what we choose to do and not to do. And any practice should know the same. And
Yes.
listeners, if you don't know that about your practice, and I don't mean what you do, like what your specialty is, I mean, why people choose you and why you're a little bit different, then where the endpoint's got to be. It's
Mm-hmm.
got to be there, because the emotional satisfaction that's better with you than wherever they are now, if they don't agree that that's what they're looking for, well, then they're probably not going to become a patient of yours, but you'll know. So if you're feeling resistance to guiding them there and you're trying everything you can, then there it is. So you've got your starting point, what brings you in today, and you've got your end point. They need to see it, we do. And then just let the Q&A guide you. Maybe is that like the beginning of the recipe?
In large part, I mean, you have to ask questions that are going to guide them into the right direction for the
Yeah.
answers. But absolutely, where the power of all this, we call it emotional horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
Where the emotional horsepower comes from is the second level of questions, the third level of question. Um, you
Yeah.
can ask any question and get a shallow response, but do you know when to dig deeper?
Right.
I mean, the answer is most of the time you
Right.
have to dig
You need to
deeper.
develop that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't take long to do so. Again,
Right.
seconds, not minutes.
Right. And
This is,
that's the listening, your $1 million ear, right?
yeah,
Can you tell us
yeah,
a bit more about that?
sure. Um, uh, with this, there are a few different things that we're teaching people to listen for. Um, and it really depends on what they're missing. But so some people, I'll teach them to listen for, is this patient speaking visually, auditorily, kinesthetically?
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the easy things to hear. Are they talking about, well, I see that? Or are
Mm-hmm.
they, so if someone's visual, here's some hints for you.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's very visual in the moment about this topic, and people
Okay.
change, people have a preferred representational system, but
Mm-hmm.
they do change it depending on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're very visual right now, then they tend to be talking about clear 30,000 foot view. I can see that. Um, and they tend to talk a bit faster. They might tend to talk a bit more up in their throat
Mm-hmm.
um, than down low.
Okay.
Uh, and they might jump around a little bit more with the metaphors they're using, or they might be a little bit closer to the ADHD kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Okay.
ADHD, and so I notice a lot of very visual people. Like I can relate to that very easily.
Okay.
And then with people who are in the auditory mode, primarily with this, they're going to talk about, like, they might say the word clear, but they're going to be talking about it sounds clear, like it's
Oh,
clear as a bell rather than it
right.
looks clear, and you'll be able to tell from context.
Okay.
They'll talk about resonance. They'll talk about um, if they talk about muddled, they're talking about a muddled sound rather than a
Sure.
muddled sight. So
Okay.
listen to their metaphors that they're using. Listen to their sense words that they're using.
Okay.
Those people tend to have a bit more of a rolling gait to their words, maybe even a bit of a lilt, and
Okay.
they tend to use longer sentences than are necessary to get the idea across, strictly necessary,
Okay.
because you can tell they're kind of developing the thought by talking it out,
Mm-hmm.
and so they kind of talk a lot, and
Okay.
some of those people even you might say they like hearing themselves talk. Okay,
Right.
that's valid for some of them.
Okay.
Some of them they're just thinking out loud. And then the kinesthetic people, they tend to speak much more slowly. So sometimes this is really significant. They'll have bigger pauses between their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you're in person, you can even tell when they're in their feelings because they tend to be looking down to access their thinking.
Okay.
When they're auditory, they tend to be looking level. When they're visual, they tend to be looking up. I don't get real granular with this stuff. I mean, you can go as
It's
deep
funny
down
because
that
I look
rabbit
up
hole as you
sometimes and
want.
now I'm like self-diagnosing and wondering what the hell's
Right,
going on.
right. You can have a lot of fun in that realm, but a lot of times that stuff goes deeper than what most providers need. They need some emergency scripting a lot of times, and so we
Hmm.
provide that.
Okay.
But
And is the idea that the provider then kind of mirrors or sort of modulates how they converse with the person depending on how that person
modulates is a good
converses?
way. Yeah, I think of it as translation. If
Okay.
somebody doesn't know any medical jargon, are you going to throw all that stuff at them and expect them to follow along with the conversation?
Hmm.
Of course not.
Right.
Sometimes it gets done
Hmm.
accidentally, or or from a place of ego. Even I've seen that happen too.
Hmm.
But if you want someone to be able to follow and imagine what's happening, we got to break it down. That's a big
Hmm.
deal.
And that's part of the $1 million ear, right?
Exactly. And why would we not do the same thing with the emotional worlds? If they're speaking emotional Spanish and I'm
Hmm.
speaking emotional English, but I happen to also speak fluent emotional Spanish,
Hmm.
what's the obvious choice here? Let's speak their
Yeah.
preferred language so that they don't have to do the extra mental work. They can put all of their mental energy on making a healthy decision instead of trying to figure out what's going on. The
Hmm.
confused mind says no. And so
Yes.
when they have clarity all along, and you build that clarity with them instead of springing it on them at the end because, well, I've got it, here it is.
Yeah.
It's just so much easier to get decisions to move forward from people.
Right.
They have time to think about each bit, when they have time to process.
So converse how they converse to make life easier for them
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
moment.
In some
Gotcha.
very simple mechanical ways. That's one way that can be done. Just paying attention to people's internal metaphors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got
If
it.
somebody says, I feel blocked, I'm going to talk about moving that block to the side or
Hmm.
reducing the size of that block.
Hmm.
Or like I'm going to ask questions around that, around their internal metaphor. And
Got
it
it.
sounds weird to say, but it feels very natural in the moment.
Right. Right. And so $1 million ear, that's one thing that you work with clients on is how to develop listening, develop like
Right.
really advanced. It sounds like advanced level listening to me.
I think I could call it that. Yeah, I like that too.
Well, $1 million ear is quite catchy, so I don't leave that one so quickly. Um, so another question I had is there are some practices out there that are large enough where they want to hire a field business development person, clinical rep. There's a number of
Yeah,
different terms for it, but at the end of the day, it's a person that represents the practice and goes out into the defined geographic area
mhm,
and tries to, more than anything else, generate referral sources.
yeah,
For example, I have a client that's a physical therapy practice, and they are thinking about hiring just such a person who would go to primary care, pediatricians, all sorts of places
right, right.
to get the word out about them so that referrals can happen. Now, in that case, the practice owner isn't necessarily doing sales per se themselves, although I suppose they would for referrals that would come in. But now you got to find the aptitude in somebody else and make a good hiring decision. So, what are some, you know,
Yeah.
advice you have? So it's probably even higher to hire. It's harder to hire for something you aren't necessarily that skilled at than just to try to do it yourself for a while,
Oh,
I
so much harder.
suppose. So,
I'd say 600% harder.
so how do you do that? Like, you don't want to get the full textbook on it, but
Yeah,
now you got to hire for a role you're not that sure about.
right. Well,
How do you get
okay.
started on that one?
Yeah. The simplest thing, and we see this a lot with front desk people as well.
True.
When the
Okay.
front desk has the opportunity to do a large percentage of the selling that happens in that practice.
Hmm.
So hiring for a good front desk, there's definitely an art to it,
Hmm.
but you can take some of it out of the realm of mysticism and make it very mechanical. So, can you write down the KPIs for this position, the key performance indicators for this position?
Okay.
Um, if anything you can turn into a metric, uh, that's going to be a powerful way for a non expert in that skill set
Mhm.
to be able to manage that position.
But I mean hiring. So you haven't hired the person yet. I'm thinking of the outside person.
Oh,
Just to make it very
I'm with you.
specific.
You need to develop these KPIs before you hire
Got it.
so
Okay.
that you can tell who to hire. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
The sooner you have that job scorecard with the KPIs on it, um, because a lot of the management stuff that I see with not just with salespeople, with operations people, with admin people, etc., the tighter you can make your feedback loop, the faster you can coach, the faster you can fix a problem, the faster you can scale, the faster
Yeah.
everything changes when you tighten that feedback loop to the appropriate level.
Right.
So there's if you can create some simple KPIs for that position
Mhm.
that you can look at twice a week, or that the appropriate person can look at twice a week.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be the doctor always. I
Mhm.
don't know the situation in that practice, for instance, in the
Mhm.
physical therapy practice. But this is when you can make that feedback loop very tight
Mhm.
and you can be confident that you're measuring the right things,
Mhm.
then um, that's really the big things that you need for effective management. So you can take your feelings out of it.
Right.
Oh, well, we haven't gotten any results in 11 whole days. Okay.
Mhm.
How long is a reasonable time frame before you get results from whatever strategy it is that you're doing?
Right.
Um,
So that makes sense. Like
it's like
on
you don't let a patient stop taking an antibiotics course after 3 days if they need to be on it for 11 days just because they feel better.
yeah.
So, I mean, it happens both ways. It
Mhm.
looks like you're getting results, and so a lot of people slack off on the initial efforts that got those results. No,
Mhm.
you have to stay strong. If it's working, double down,
Right.
etc.
Right. So that makes sense. Like on the I'll say like the hard numbers. But how do you hire for $1 million a year? How do you see that in an interview process or detect it?
It's harder. We consult on that kind of stuff pretty frequently,
Okay.
um, and there is a great deal of skill that goes into that. Um, you can get lucky. Uh,
Mhm.
it's
Hard way to run a
slower.
business. Luck is not a strategy. Hope is not a
It's really
strategy.
not. It's
Hope is
not
hope.
right.
Luck's vital in life. Without luck, where would we be? But you can't plan luck.
You can't.
You can't resource luck.
Right.
Um, you can't make luck
There,
go faster.
right.
So it's not a
Exactly.
strategy. Yeah, it's not
Exactly.
a process. Yeah.
So the in the interview, the things that I would be looking for I've gotten asked more about front desk than I have about field
Okay.
rep.
Okay.
There are some different skill sets there, but I'll talk about both for a second here. For front desk, cheerful but able to listen.
Mm,
Cheerful and can keep things moving fast, but doesn't run over people at the same time.
got it.
So you don't want a steamroller in the front desk. You want
Okay.
someone who has good high EQ, but high energy, fast moving, etc.
Got it.
For the field rep, this person, they have the time, and you can really hire a salesperson for this.
Mhm.
You can hire somebody, well, that's their primary skill set, and they're going to dive into that. And
Okay.
so, one of the things that I would look for with that is what sales methods are you currently studying?
Hmm.
Are you studying? What kind of role play do you do? What do you do to develop your? I mean, salespeople have continuing education just the same as
Yeah.
anybody else.
Yeah.
Almost no company or organization forces salespeople to do CE, but
Hmm.
it's absolutely necessary. If you're not growing, you're dying.
Hmm.
And so, if you've got someone who is demonstrating to you that they are actively working to improve their sales skills,
Hmm.
um, there are some easy things you can do around that.
Okay.
Um, Tell me about the sales courses or books that you're reading,
Hmm.
and then you ask them, okay, how long have you been reading that book?
Hmm.
You ask them, okay, when did you study that course? Okay, sorry, we're
That's
gonna
okay.
have a cut for a minute here. Hey, hey. I've got a house guest for a couple days here, and
Okay.
so We'll be quiet again in a minute. I can restart that segment. Sorry, I didn't warn you, Stephen. Let me grab the door. All right. So if we've got people who can spend all their time on sales skills, then that second level question, when you're in an interview, think of this a little bit more like an interrogation.
Okay.
And when you've got a patient consultation or a patient interview, when you're hiring someone who's going to be dedicated to sales, and you don't have much skill around this, second layer questions and the third layer questions are going to be your big friends right there.
Okay. That's an example of a second layer question.
When did you study this?
Okay.
How much time during your day do you spend studying this?
Right. Well, doctors ought to be good at that, because getting to what's the fact, what's going on, let's wash away the interpretation and the assumption of the patient and just give me the facts. I'd be pretty good at it.
And there's no way to verify most of this stuff.
True.
But you can gauge it in the moment. If someone is giving you fading facts, oh, well, I studied this for a couple of weeks. Like if their answer is getting quieter and quieter, they're not confident in that answer. That's a very consistent. That's a very consistent indicator. There are a lot of tells for truthfulness, and we talked about that kind of stuff.
Excellent.
I love Chase Hughes' 6-Minute X-Ray book for tells of confidence and truthfulness versus deception and things like that. And that can be really important in interviewing.
Got it.
But yeah, gauging the answers that you get back on your second and third layer questions, when you get into details, details are your friend when you are interviewing. A lot of people, they're almost just asking questions pro forma so that they can get a feel for the interviewee in front of them.
Yeah.
But those questions, put some weight on them and be ready for that second and third layer question, and it'll help you a lot with hiring.
Yeah. And it's worth developing this, obviously, because you're hiring some person, you're going to pay them real money. They're going to represent your name out there, walking across the countryside looking for people to refer.
Making a $2 million a year difference in your business very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, a very large difference. And it's funny, when I worked in corporate, I worked in corporate for a lot of years, and we had to hire people, and there were hiring teams that had a really good process, and I was on hiring teams where it was just really, there wasn't any, and we'd all meet. And I remember I was in one where there were 4 or 5 of us, and we were all going to ask the same. That was the going in. We're all going to ask the same questions 4 or 5 times. Like, well, why don't we divide and conquer here? I'll take this. What is it you need to know, hiring manager? I was one of the people they wanted to do that, to do some interviewing. So which part do you want me to focus on? How about this other one? And then collectively, we'll ask everything you need to know, rather than each of us asking 20% of what you need to know, the same 20% of what you need to know.
Right.
So my point of that is, have a process. It's I know it feels uncomfortable and it feels like some time, but it can be efficient, and it definitely can be done. Excellent. Thank you. So you've said a few different times, this is something that we do with clients. Tell us a bit about Sales Call Overhaul.
Sure. We help our clients fix broken. We've passed the window, I think.
Okay.
For easy audio, but we'll get there. We help our clients fix broken sales processes.
Okay.
And there are a lot of processes.
Does broken mean non-existent also?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We help our clients either create a sales process, or we help them fix broken sales processes.
Okay.
If the business is ongoing right now, then there is a sales process. It may not be written down. It may not be very logical, but
Hmm.
something is happening to make those sales.
Got it.
So fixing the breaks in that, and sometimes just completing a couple of elements that they kind of exist, but there wasn't a vision for how they fit.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's all that's necessary.
Right.
And so sometimes that's coordinating with the marketing team a little bit
Hmm.
and creating a strong handoff from marketing into sales.
Hmm.
And sometimes that, more frequently, it happens more toward the end of the process, where the doctor's feeling frustrated or stuck or sometimes even scared of some element of sales. And so we can help them just change the smallest amount possible to
Hmm.
fix the problem. We're always looking for minimum effective dose, I guess you could say.
Okay. And when you say towards the end, that's where the close rate comes in, right? So I'm talking to all these patients, but none of them are becoming, and all these prospective patients, but none of them are becoming real patients. That's the
Exactly.
part you're talking about.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh, and sometimes we talk with the marketing team about qualification of leads,
Hmm.
but most of the time it's in that closing process, that final conversation
Yeah.
before somebody says yes.
Got
That's
it.
always the first place we look, is the end of that process, and then
Right.
we kind of work our way back toward the marketing department from
Got
there.
it. Okay. And they sound like they're not necessarily like engagements with you. They're not these like many months, huge overhaul types of projects. They sound
That's a good point.
lighter touch, I guess.
Yeah, we do call it an overhaul, but that's a very good point. We use the lightest touch we possibly can. I have um, basically a power day kind of thing, or a power weekend kind of thing,
Okay.
where people come in, or I go to them for 20K or less,
Hmm.
depending on exactly what we're putting together there. And we set them up with the smallest changes that we can manage
Okay.
that work inside their practice.
Okay.
So I don't want anyone to have to revamp the way they run their practice. I don't want anyone to have to totally revolutionize the way they run their business. I mean,
Hmm.
you've got systems in place for a reason. Let's use those. Let's use everything that is working to the
Right.
hilt. And
Right.
let's only add something if we have to. Let's only change something if we have to.
Got it.
It's
Okay.
usually smaller than people think it is.
Right. Which is more approachable, I think,
Yeah,
than some of the other ones out there. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you. There's a couple of questions that I ask every guest as sort of the
Okay.
beginning of the wrap up. And the first one is, now that you've heard this conversation and what we've talked about, is there anything you think that I should have asked you that's relevant but just didn't?
Oh no, that was so much fun. Um, yeah,
Fun and complete, or there's something we left out?
there's always more that we could talk about.
True.
I can talk for so many hours at a time. I have to. The reason I talk about the $1 million ear is I'm preaching to myself on that stuff.
Got it.
So yeah, I feel like that's a comfortable start.
Okay, excellent. And for those who are listening who've been a bit inspired by this and say, this is once and for all, I have to tackle this, or at least get started. What are one or two tangible steps you would advise them to use to get started, as soon as they're done listening to this?
Yeah, write down the sales process that you're using. I use flowcharts. I build flowcharts for all my clients. If you
Okay.
like flowcharts, make a flowchart of what
Hmm.
happens. It will give you insight into what's going on. Two, start paying attention to how much of the time you're talking versus listening. In most consultative sales applications, not just the medical world,
Hmm.
we find that 60/40 patient provider, or 60/40 client service provider,
Sure.
is a pretty solid ratio.
Okay.
Uh,
So listen more than you talk.
a lot more, a
Yeah.
lot more, and that's a calibration thing. You just have to get a feel for that.
Hmm.
Um, Three is start paying attention to the metaphors that someone uses. That's the handles on their internal world, and you can help them manipulate that. You can help them get things out of the way. You can help them move things around in their internal world when you use their metaphors the way that they use their metaphors.
Okay.
Very easy to start paying attention to.
So write down your process. Your process is, step one, the phone rings. Step two, we schedule an appointment or like a, that's the level that you're talking about.
Almost any level can give insight.
True.
But as granular as you have time for,
Mhm.
go for it.
So write down what you know. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
Listen more than you talk, and listen for how they're talking,
Yeah.
and try to talk with them the way they talk, because not because it's manipulative, but because that's how they talk. We're the same. We all have our own style of talking, and we tend to gravitate towards those who talk like we do. Or at least it feels like a better experience in the moment.
It can be a rapport builder. Yes.
There you go. Yes.
I'm a clinical hypnotist from 2001 onward, and an
Okay.
NLP practitioner. So I love all the rapport and all that kind of stuff. I learned all the matching and mirroring, things like that.
Right.
But the internal metaphors, if somebody says, I feel stuck, and you
Mm-hmm.
talk about feeling stuck and getting unstuck,
Mm-hmm.
that in particular is going to be very powerful for them.
There you go. You feel stuck. So what's sticking in your place, or whatever it is? Use their like.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This is exactly, Jeremy. This is what I was hoping for. I was hoping to talk sales, the topic of sales, with someone who is not tremendously salesy, I guess, which is, it's very doable. And from what I can tell, at least my feeling is you've done, and I really appreciate it. I hope this is a lot of value for those who are listening. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and we're going to put all your contact info in the show notes, but is there a preferred way that if somebody wants to contact you, you'd like them to use?
Yeah, just head over to salescalloverhaul.com.
Okay.
That's the easy place. We've got a Facebook group. It's not aimed at doctors, but we have a Facebook group. You're welcome to join. The processes that we teach are very similar when you get into the emotional part of the process.
Got it.
So once you're in that final consultation, a lot of these things are very similar. You'll be able to get insight there. But yeah, if you want to get in touch, we would love that. And just go to salescalloverhaul.com and email us or message our Facebook page or join the group.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You got it. All right. And just a couple of points before we wrap up. For those of you who are listening, if you've had an experience with the business, so if you own a practice and you've had an experience with the business side of your practice that you think others would benefit from, or if you're someone like Jeremy or I that work a lot with private practice owners, we'd love to have you on Practice Care so that you can share your knowledge with the world and benefit others. In the show notes for this episode and all episodes, there's a link with instructions on just fill out the form so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And then finally, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Practice Care on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again, and until next time.